What does the court do from here? What are its options?
So it has a number of options. So if you recall, last week, a federal appeals court, a 3-judge panel said you do not get criminal immunity. That's not a thing. Presidents are not entitled to avoid a criminal trial because of actions they took while president. He is now asking the Supreme Court to put that ruling on hold so that the trial will not go forward. He's saying, put it on hold. I might go to a fuller panel of judges at the D.C. Circuit. I might go to the Supreme Court with my appeal. The Supreme Court has the option of granting that, keeping the trial on hold while they sort that out, turning it down, which means that the trial goes forward. Or the court could say, you know, we're just going to actually treat this like an appeal, and we're going to go ahead and take up this case and decide whether or not you're right on immunity.
That said, considering really the urgent nature of the request here in the throes of an actual presidential campaign, is the Supreme Court compelled to act quickly here?
It's not compelled. They're aware of what's going on. You know, one of the interesting dynamics about this is we all know there's a campaign. We know there's an election coming up. But it's not something that Jack Smith has been arguing because he doesn't want to be giving the appearance of, I want to get a conviction before the election. He's talking about the urgency because it's such an important issue. But the justices will know that. We're seeing them move very quickly in that other big case they have, the case involving the Colorado, whether he can be on the ballot in Colorado. So I would imagine whatever they do here, it will be fast.
Well, to your point on Colorado, its primary is on Super Tuesday, March 5th. It's coming up pretty quickly, and they theoretically would need to decide whether Trump's going to appear on a ballot before then. Is it likely that the court is going to want to get that buttoned up before they deal with this immunity question?
I'm not sure if it's do one and then do the other. They're going to see both of these cases kind of at the same time. Undoubtedly, they're busily writing whatever opinion or opinions they're writing now. I'm anticipating that ruling will happen very quickly, whether it's before Super Tuesday or not, hard to say. And they'll be able to, you know, think about that at the same time they're thinking about this. And it may well be we end up in a world where Donald Trump can be on the ballot, but a criminal trial goes forward and the voters will decide what it all means.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be an interesting week for this president, former president, I should say, in Donald Trump, as he waits to hear on this Manhattan case as well. It's likely then Stormy Daniels is the first case that is held in this series of criminal cases, yes?
Yeah, that's certainly possible. That's obviously, Jack Smith is still trying very hard to get this trial to go forward. There was a March 4th trial date. Yeah. That's not going to happen. That's been suspended. It's certainly possible. There's a world in which if the court acts very quickly, rejects Donald Trump here, the trial could happen not too long after that. And in a lot of ways, that's really the biggest one because it goes right to the heart of the alleged efforts to overturn the election.
Thanks for helping us decipher all of this. It's great to see you again. Greg Stohr with us on Balance of Power. Elsewhere, former President Trump saying he would abandon NATO members to a Russian incursion if the allies failed to meet defense spending commitments. Let's turn now to Bloomberg's Dan Flatley for more on this. Comments on the campaign trail, Dan, in South Carolina receiving condemnation from around the world, including Jens Stoltenberg himself, the Secretary General at NATO.
Yes, I mean, you can imagine how these comments were greeted by the U.S.'s allies in Europe. You know, this type of rhetoric goes back a long way with former President Donald Trump, as you well know, Joe. I think what has changed now, obviously, in 2024 versus when he was making these sorts of comments in 2018 and 2019 is that the U.S. is engaged in certainly an economic campaign against Russia in Ukraine, but is supplying the Ukrainian military with a lot of arms, a lot of hardware, a lot of financial support. And there are countries neighboring Ukraine that are very nervous about what would happen if Ukraine should fall ultimately, and could they be next? And could there be an incursion onto a NATO country by Russia? So this is very much a live issue, so a bit of a different context from when we've heard this before.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, while we're paying attention to geopolitical conflict in Europe, what that could potentially mean for NATO allies, we're also paying attention to what's happening in the Middle East after Israel's operations in Rafah over the weekend, that southern part of the Gaza Strip, where they were able to extract 2 hostages. But there has been great concern about potential civilian casualties that could result from Israel's action there. And this is something that National Security Council spokesman John Kirby spoke about earlier today.
I've also seen reports that civilians were killed over the weekend in Rafah due to Israeli operations. I can't confirm those reports, But as we have said many times, the proper number of civilian casualties is 0. We don't want to see a single innocent civilian death, Israeli or Palestinian. But let me be clear, there can be no enduring end to this crisis until Hamas releases the men and women that they are holding hostage, all of them.
And Dan, of course, today, right now, in fact, President Biden is meeting at the White House with King Abdullah II from Jordan. The king saying we can't afford Israel's attack on Rafah, while Biden was saying they're working to open other humanitarian corridors in Gaza, considering the Rafah Gate was one of those main ones. It seems like the Biden administration is trying to take a tougher stance here on Israel and what it's doing. What's your read?
Well, I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, the Biden administration is coming under enormous pressure at this point, not just from Republicans on doing more for Israel potentially, but also on from Democrats who want to see the Biden administration really press the Israeli government on these potential civilian casualties. Just a few minutes before we came on air, Senator Chris Van Hollen, a Democrat of Maryland, was on the Senate floor talking about how Biden really needs to press the Israeli government on this. So the calls for this type of thing will increase in the coming days. But what's happening in Gaza and what's happening with Israel is connected to what's happening with Ukraine and with Russia, because the funding for those two conflicts is connected at this point on Capitol Hill. So there's going to be a little bit of three-dimensional chess that the Biden administration is going to have to play in order to get some of that funding through for Ukraine, which they want, for Israel, which they want, but also try to put some pressure on the Israeli government to reduce civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip.
All right, Dan Flatley, thank you so much. Now turning to Congress, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer discussing the supplemental aid package they're going to try to pass this week earlier on the Senate floor.
Over the weekend, the Senate took the significant step towards passing the National Security Supplemental by voting last night on cloture on the substitute 6727. By now, we have taken numerous procedural votes that prove beyond doubt that there's strong support behind this bill. It's time to finish the job.
Joining us now is Kate Ackley from Bloomberg Government, who covers Congress for us. So, Kate, obviously you're seeing numbers north of 60, the requisite number to pass these procedural motions. We saw them working on Super Bowl Tuesday to advance this further. It's going to be a question, though, of what the final vote tally ultimately is in the Senate. What kind of mandate, therefore, it would give the House as it considers what it wants to do with this measure.
Absolutely right. The House is still the big question, and it's not clear that something that includes aid for Ukraine, aid for Israel, and this other stuff can even get through the House. I mean, there are all kinds of procedural things. You know, people talk about doing a discharge petition so you can put a bill on the House floor that doesn't have leadership support. But, you know, there's just a lot of murkiness about how this is all going to go down, and you did see senators working over the weekend, including during the Super Bowl, to try to get this thing over the finish line, to try to send a big bipartisan message. But it's still unclear. And there is a lot of political division that has emerged even in the last few months.
Well, how this does go down remains a big question in the Senate, but especially in the House. I talked to Bill Hoagland earlier today from the Bipartisan Policy Center here in Washington, and spent many years working in the Senate about what might happen next. Here he is.
The 30 hours post the vote on Sunday will run out on Wednesday, and by then they will pass it. It's clear it's going to go over to the House. The new speaker is trying to figure out himself as to what strategy he wants to pursue. I believe that there are clearly, if it was put to a vote in the House of Representatives, it would overwhelmingly pass. So there are various approaches he could take.
Isn't that incredible? And that's been the case really through this whole debate surrounding Ukraine. If it actually got to the floor, there would be probably enough Democrats and Republicans to make this happen. So the speaker's got a tough choice here. Could his career be on the line?
It seems like his career is on the line every day on everything.
Sure,
you know, we talk about that on numerous issues. So, yes, definitely it is. But, you know, there's going to be a lot of pressure that will just continue to build. But you've seen like we saw just a few minutes ago, where you have Democrats who are concerned about some of the things that are happening in Gaza, criticizing Israel. You know, the longer this drags on, the more sort of politically fragile some of these alliances get. But yes, Speaker Johnson, I'm sure, understands that he's got a lot of important divisions from his own conference that he'll have to contend with if he were to put this on the floor.